The river was wild that day. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days, and the currents roared like a beast finally unleashed. Trees swayed violently, mud slid down the banks, and the skies remained an angry gray. People rushed by the park trail, shielding themselves from the storm, never noticing what was just beneath the surface of the chaos. But Max did. Max wasn't just any dog. He was a golden retriever with a heart bigger than his body, adopted 5 years ago by an elderly man named Walter, who lived in a modest cabin near the woods. Since Walter's stroke last spring, Max had taken it upon himself to be more than a companion. He became his eyes, ears, and on some days his reason to smile. That morning, Max had been restless. Something was wrong. He paced near the porch, barked at the wind, and refused to eat his breakfast. Walter tried to soothe him. "Easy, boy, just the rain," he said in a frail voice. But Max wouldn't sit still. Then, around mid-morning, he bolted, leaping over the porch railing and charging into the storm. Walter's eyes widened. "Max, come back." But the dog was already gone, a blur of wet fur vanishing into the trees. Max sprinted through the soaked forest with purpose, his nose to the ground and ears perked for a sound that only he could sense. Then, just as he reached the edge of the river, he heard it. A cry, high-pitched, terrified, and helpless. Max darted forward. The muddy bank gave way to the turbulent river below, and there, tangled in roots and debris, was a tiny, spotted baby deer. The fawn was barely a few weeks old, soaked to the bone, trembling and bleeding in fear. Its frail legs kicked uselessly against the current. Max didn't hesitate. He barked loudly, but there was no one around. Not a soul in sight. Just the storm, and the baby deer slowly losing its grip. With a leap, Max plunged into the icy river. The current hit him like a wall. He paddled hard, fighting the pull of the water. Mud, leaves, and broken branches swirled around him. His ears flattened, but his eyes never left the deer. The fawn let out another terrified cry, its head barely above water. It was slipping. Max reached it just in time. He circled around, positioning himself behind the fawn, nudging it with his snout toward the bank. The deer struggled, panicked, but Max didn't back off. He pushed, gently yet firmly, using his chest and body to guide the fawn around the debris. More branches swept by, nearly pulling Max under. He coughed, choked, but kept going. The shore wasn't far now. The baby deer was exhausted. Its cries had faded to soft whimpers, its legs barely moving. Max knew he had to act fast. With one final burst of strength, he lunged forward, placing his body between the deer and the strongest part of the current, shielding it. Bit by bit, he forced them both closer to the edge. Finally, the bank. Max dug his paws into the mud and heaved himself and the fawn onto solid ground. Both collapsed in a heap, soaked, shivering, and breathless. Max panted heavily, his sides heaving, eyes fixed on the fragile creature beside him. The deer didn't move at first. Max nudged it with his nose once, twice, and then it lifted its head, weak but alive. A distant voice rang through the forest. "Max! Max! Walter!" Max barked in response, weakly but clearly. Within moments, the old man appeared through the trees, stumbling, his cane nearly slipping in the mud. His eyes widened when he saw them. "Oh my God! Max!" he cried. Walter dropped to his knees. He touched Max's soaked fur, his hands trembling. You saved it?" The fawn blinked at Walter. Max licked its tiny ear, then let out a soft, tired whine. Walter was speechless. For a long moment, he just sat there in the rain, tears mixing with the downpour, watching his dog, his best friend, lie beside a baby deer he had no reason to save. But Max didn't need a reason. He just knew. Suddenly, the fawn stirred again. It tried to stand, wobbled, then slowly found its legs. It looked at Max one last time, eyes wide and gentle, then stepped cautiously into the woods. Walter watched in awe. "You brought it back to life," he whispered. Max sighed, laying his head down. The rain continued to fall, but something had changed. The forest no longer felt so heavy. The river still roared, but in a different tone, less angry, more alive. Walter reached out and rubbed Max's ears. "Let's get you home, hero." But just as he stood to lift Max, there was a sudden rustle in the bushes. Max's ears perked. Walter froze. From the shadows emerged something that made Walter's heart skip a beat. The fawn had returned. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, stepping cautiously into the clearing, was its mother. The deer looked at Max, then at Walter, and for a long, breathless moment, none of them moved. And then, something remarkable happened. The mother deer bowed her head slightly. A silent thank you. Then, with a final look, she turned and led her baby into the trees. Walter exhaled, still stunned. I don't think anyone's going to believe this. But Max knew. And that was enough. The section ends here, but the story isn't over yet. The next morning, the rain had finally stopped. The air still smelled of wet earth and pine, and the river's roar had quieted to a steady murmur. Golden sunlight filtered through the tree canopy, casting shimmering patches of light over the forest floor. But inside the little cabin, Walter's world was focused on only one thing: Max. Wrapped in a thick towel and lying by the fireplace, Max was still shivering slightly. Walter sat beside him with a warm cup of tea in one hand and a blanket in the other. The events of the previous day kept replaying in his mind like a dream too unbelievable to be real. You're incredible, you know that? Walter whispered, brushing his fingers through Max's damp fur. You saved that little one. And you didn't even think twice. Max opened one eye, tail thumping once against the floor in reply. There was a gentle knock at the door. Walter hesitated. Now who on earth? He opened it to find Ellie, the local park ranger, standing there in her muddy boots, holding a thermos and looking breathless. Walter, I heard about what happened, she said quickly. Did your dog really jump into the river to save a fawn? Walter nodded slowly. I didn't believe it myself, but yes, he did. Ellie stepped inside, her eyes falling on Max. That's the bravest thing I've heard all year, she said, crouching to stroke his head. We've had dozens of fawns separated in the flood. Most never make it. But that little one, someone saw it with its mother this morning, just a mile upstream. Walter's face lit up. It made it, she nodded. Thanks to him. Max gave a sleepy huff as if saying, just doing my job. Word traveled fast in the small town. By afternoon, neighbors were dropping by to see the dog. Everyone was suddenly calling a hero. Kids brought him biscuits. An old woman from the bakery delivered warm rolls for Walter. The local vet even showed up to check Max for injuries. He's sore and a bit dehydrated, she said, but no broken bones. Just rest and love. And I think he's got plenty of both here. Walter smiled, though tears brimmed in his eyes. He gave me something too, he gave me hope. But as the house settled down and the sun dipped lower in the sky, Max stirred. Something tugged at him. His ears twitched. He stood slowly, wobbling for a second before padding to the door. Walter raised an eyebrow. What is it now? Max barked once. It wasn't a bark of alarm. It was a call. A signal. Walter opened the door, and Max walked slowly down the steps and into the woods. Walter followed. They walked for 15 minutes through the still damp forest. The sky above turned pink and orange, birds chirped softly, and a hush seemed to blanket the trees. Then, just ahead in a clearing, they saw it. The fawn. It was standing at the edge of the trees, healthy and alert, and not alone. Its mother stood beside it once more, and between them another fawn. Smaller, newly born. Walter froze. She had twins. Max walked forward slowly, respectfully, and the mother deer didn't retreat. Instead, the baby, the one Max had saved, stepped forward, took a few cautious steps, and touched noses with him. A moment of connection passed that no human words could ever describe. Something pure. Something understood only by the heart. Max sat quietly, content. Walter whispered, You didn't just save a life, you saved a future. The deer family slowly turned and faded into the woods, and Max stood still for a long moment, watching them disappear. Back at the cabin that night, Walter built a new sign for their porch. Max's home, where all are safe. And under the flickering porch light, the town's little hero curled up and finally slept the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who had done something truly good in a world that so desperately needed it. But the story doesn't end here, because the forest had taken notice, and Max's journey was far from over. That night, under a moonlit sky, another cry pierced the silence, and Max's ears twitched once more. The adventure had just begun. The cry echoed again through the woods, thin, frightened, and unfamiliar. It wasn't the same desperate wail as the baby deer's had been, but it struck something in Max, deep and instinctual. He raised his head from his blanket, ears alert. The fire was still glowing warmly beside him, and Walter was dozing in his armchair. Max stood. His muscles still ached, and he limped slightly, but his purpose burned stronger than the pain. Outside, the forest was silvered with moonlight. The trees whispered gently in the breeze, and the damp soil squished under Max's paws as he followed the sound. It was coming from the rocky ridge past the stream, an area few dared to tread, especially at night. He moved carefully but quickly, weaving through the undergrowth until he reached a narrow crevice between two boulders. That's when he saw it. A small raccoon, barely more than a kit, had gotten its leg caught in a rusted snare trap. Illegal and cruel. It chirped and struggled, panicking at Max's sudden appearance. Max approached slowly, tail low, eyes soft. He remembered how fear felt. He had seen it in the deer's eyes. The raccoon hissed weakly, tugging at the snare, but it had already cut into its fur. Max sniffed the trap carefully, then turned and barked once. Loud and sharp. Far away, Walter stirred in his chair. The barking came again. Walter blinked, sat upright, and instantly knew. Max! He grabbed his coat and flashlight, calling out into the darkness, then followed the trail Max had taken. His feet stumbled over roots and rocks, but he didn't stop. Not now. Not when Max needed him. 15 minutes later, he saw the glow of Max's eyes in the brush. What is it, boy? Max stepped aside to reveal the trapped raccoon. Walter's heart clenched. Oh no, not again. He pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket, kneeling beside the animal. The raccoon flinched, but Max stayed close, calming it. Walter carefully loosened the rusty wires. The raccoon squeaked, but didn't bite, too tired. With Max's comforting presence and Walter's slow hands, the trap finally came free. The raccoon didn't run. It stayed there for a few seconds, breathing heavily, watching Max. Then, with a tiny grunt, it scurried toward the woods, glancing back once before vanishing into the trees. Walter looked at Max. You're doing it again, aren't you? Turning this forest into a haven. One life at a time. Max wagged his tail softly. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. Stories of animal rescues began to emerge all over town. A hiker lost in the woods found her way back after hearing a dog bark in the distance. A fox caught in a fence was discovered freed with signs a large animal had dug it loose. People began whispering about the guardian of the forest. Not a spirit, not a myth, just Max. Local schoolchildren painted a mural near the trailhead. A golden retriever standing proud beside a deer and raccoon under a glowing moon. Tourists came hoping to catch a glimpse of the hero dog. But Max didn't care for fame. His mission was silent, instinctive. He simply helped those who couldn't help themselves. Walter, rejuvenated by purpose, started documenting Max's adventures online. A video of Max rescuing the deer, captured from a nearby hiker's drone camera, went viral. Emails poured in. News stations called. Animal rescue groups asked to interview them. But Walter turned most offers down. He doesn't do this for cameras, he'd say. He does it because it's who he is. One crisp autumn morning, Walter stood by the trailhead with Max sitting beside him. A little girl walked up, tears in her eyes, holding a picture of her lost kitten. Max sniffed it. His ears perked. He stood. Walter looked at the girl and smiled gently. Don't worry, sweetheart. If anyone can find her, Max can. And with that, the golden retriever trotted into the woods once more, the leaves crunching beneath his paws, the rising sun casting gold on his fur. Because some heroes don't wear capes. Some have 4 legs, kind eyes, and a heart that knows no bounds. The end.